Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for inviting me to Shenzhen here. The last time I stepped in Shenzhen was 30 years ago. So lots of changes everywhere. It was a very brilliantly planned city at the moment. Thank you for inviting me to your campus to deliver this guest lecture on From Principle to Practice, Transnational AI Regulations, Standards Harmonization, and Climate Change Application. As of this month, this topic is highly relevant and even more so in the next decade amid accelerating AI advancement and intensifying climate crisis. So during this guest lecture, we'll compare very briefly the regulatory frameworks from the UK, EU, and China, and delve into some international standards which could act as soft law mechanisms and assess the applications in climate change through targeted case studies. During this talk, I'll also incorporate some regulatory models, including principle-based regulatory model for ethical adaptability and outcome-based for tangible impact measurement, and hybrid model for integrated approaches to facilitate transnational alignment of AI laws and regulations plus standards. Mouse. Where's the mouse? Okay. Okay, the core tension in AI governance lies between fostering innovation and mitigating risk. The disjointed regulations at the moment actually impede effective global deployment and call for adaptive, value-sensitive models to prevent systemic obsolescence. AI's rapid revolution and evolution also necessitates hybrid frameworks, blending the principles with outcomes to bridge regulatory lags, which emphasize geopolitical dimensions in harmonization efforts. Yet enforcement disparities persist. For instance, there is AI Act in the EU and under which we'll see General Purpose AI or GPAI guidelines effective from July just this year, which clarify obligations and influence global standards alignments. I believe that academically, among the legal researchers, they will increasingly focus on developers' legal obligations to foster accountability in cross-border contexts. An argument for harmonization includes alleviating small and medium-sized enterprises' compliance burden, etc. That is also quite common to all the jurisdictions in balancing the innovation and the risk mitigation methods. So before I go ahead with the lecture, let me introduce briefly what the Blockchain Climate Institute does. In short, the BCI brings together international experts from over 40 countries to provide a source of knowledge and guidance on the deployment of emerging digital technologies to partner governments, including capacity building, policy support, etc. And we try our best to align our work with the UNFCCC Technology Transfer Framework, and BCI's work streams are quite popular now among the UNFCCC climate negotiators. And we are positioned as an NGO. We help create new knowledge in this new emerging interdisciplinary areas and many others policy area that badly needs either innovation or institutional capacity building. Our mission is to effect positive change by raising awareness around the international climate change policy community of the tremendous potential of digital technology to significantly enhance state and non-state climate actions through targeted technological interventions. And we were founded back in COP28 in 2017. And we now have a number of representatives sitting in various ISO standards committees, from sustainable finance, greenhouse gas management to blockchain and AI, etc., including myself. And in this lecture, we'll share some of our experience and views gained from the standards negotiation meetings, which informs probably a lot of new legal research topic. I'm also a legal researcher per se, doing my PhD in the UK at the moment, so I'm happy to exchange more views during the Q&A discussion sessions. So although we are called Blockchain Climate Institute, we don't do just blockchain because we believe that theoretically, blockchain is a high end of the digitalization goal. Before we can reach the ultimate goal of deploying blockchain or distributed ledger technologies globally or across various sectors, there are a number of preparatory steps that are required of stakeholders in order to reach the ultimate goal of blockchain adoption. That includes raising awareness and institutional capacity activities, which drives a lot of work in BCI already. We have to be technology needs assessment through feasibility studies, for example, for any governments who want to do that. We'll need to help governments provide a enabling policy regulatory environments through certain types of legal amendment, if we don't call it a reform yet, in order to make sure that all the digital assets generated on digital ledgers are perfectly lawful, particularly because lots of legal structures governing financial services and trading activities, according to current legal frameworks globally, were not found based on the digitalization process at the moment. So it's still quite a traditional intermediary-based transaction model on which to base these current legal frameworks over the last 200 years since modern economies began. And lots of changes are needed to govern the digital assets properly. And we'll need to help governments collect and process geospatial data at sectoral level through IoT, Internet of Things, or many other remote sensing technologies to do that, such as edge computing, cloud computing, store lots of data generated from IoT or remote sensing technologies as a means to verify everything before we could call it a meaningful sense of big data, which we need to cleanse and analyze at the market level with AI. So this step, the very step I would like to focus on in this guest lecture. And after we sort out as a global civilization an effective way to use AI to deal with this big data, then these data will become very meaningful to be put on a distributed ledger, such as blockchain, and then that will reach the ultimate goal of distributed ledger technology adoption globally, in our opinion. I would say since maybe 2 to 3 years ago, I guess many of you have heard about lots of heated discussions on AI globally, everywhere in the market or in many TV programs, media programs. AI sounds like buzzword at the moment. I'm not sure whether the colleagues online, joining us online, whether you're familiar with the Gartner curve of technology adoption. This is a common curve shape illustrating how every technology's journeys from the innovation trigger stage, that is the starting point of the journey, all the way to the peak of inflated expectation. That is what most of the AI is at the moment, when everybody talks about it and haven't done a lot about it yet. But when the technologies have become really familiar to people after lots of talking has been done, then we have reached the trough of disillusionment, when people find risk or bias or any other problems or unintended consequences caused by any particular technology types. And then when all these solutions float to the surface, these technologies enter a new stage called slope of enlightenment, when people gather more new knowledge, which could be fed into new regulatory models or technical standards to make the platform a lot more mature for mass adoption at industry levels. And finally, the ultimate stage here is called plateau of productivity. This is the most mature stage for any technologies. Usually, every technology will need at least more than 10 years to travel from innovation trigger stage, that is stage one, to the final stage, plateau productivity. I would say that the AI that we use at the moment, particularly with the use of DeepSeek or any other image generator that belongs to generative AI, which is the blue spot I'm circling on screen at the moment, generative AI. I guess, as people use a lot more generative AI software every day at work, I think it's already at the end of its peak of inflated expectation, since everyone have experienced the generative AI already. And but in terms of artificial general intelligence, which is another heated term, abbreviated as AGI, which refers to AI system capable of understanding, learning, and performing any intellectual task that a human can across diverse domains with human level or superior adaptability and reasoning. AGI is largely still a concept, although in my opinion, in my observation, part of the AGI programs has already been part of Grok, for example, which some of you may have used to generate and analyze these materials. Particularly research materials in academics, I found Grok quite useful because of the more advanced reasoning models developed. So I would see that personally Asia will be the next AI subcategory, which will enter the peak of inflated expectation, since it will have a wide-ranging impacts on everyone in the next 5 to 10 years. So. Okay, so I think I'm to introduce very briefly the trends of AI development in market, and then I will go on to talk about AI's transnational dynamics, followed by a very brief comparison of the current regulatory frameworks of AI in the EU, UK, and China. We will then talk about the use of technical standards, international technical standard as a soft law to bridge different types of regulatory models, supported with some legal research theories. And finally, I'll give you 1 or 2 case studies applying AI regulations in climate change applications, and see how different regulatory model can lead to certain ramifications of different outcomes that we might see in different scenarios. Okay, so now to start with, consider AI's role in optimizing global green tech supply chains, such as deploying predictive analysis for efficient solar panel distribution from China to Europe. The World Economic Forum projections indicates that AI could cut carbon emissions by 10 to 20% via optimized routing and forecasting, directly advancing the UN SDGs. However, inconsistencies in technical standards and divergent regulatory models foster perils like algorithmic biases, which actually disproportionately impacts climate vulnerable regions such as sub-Saharan Africa and exacerbating inequities in the era of digitalization. I know that some of you attending this lecture here or online may have the question in mind, AI will cause a lot more carbon emission data center. Yeah, I get that. We'll discuss this issue later on. That's a valid valid point which we work on in ISSO and ITU already. And actually, let me continue this point here. So actually, all the 3 points which I highlighted on this slide now actually exemplifies the regulatory patchwork issue, which I read from a recent Fordham International Law Journal article, where it says a mismatched framework such as EU hybrids versus Chinese principles-based regulation could potentially obstruct essential cross-border data flows for AI training or wider adoption. Or this could be some exciting topics that could inform more legal research agenda globally, and then, of course, our discussion after this presentation. AI is transforming key areas, of course, such as risk management and fraud detection, particularly in financial services sector, anti-money laundering and counter financing terrorism and regulatory appliance, wealth management and algorithmic trading, customer onboarding and service automation, climate finance and ESG integrations. This is the one I'll focus on, of course. The last one is the one I'll focus on during this lecture. It is a strategic enabler if AI is properly deployed in green finance sector. It is a strategic enabler of long-term sustainable, ethical, and resilient innovation with clear rules and safeguards for all stakeholders. Over here, as a reality check, AI is not perfect. It's not going to be perfect forever. It comes with lots of risk, and bias can reinforce discrimination if trained on skewed datasets, even if unintentionally. Privacy concerns arise from personal data use, as AI training require vast amounts of data that may be protected by privacy rules. What's more, accountability falters with opaque decision-making and lack of transparency leaves us guessing how AI works. These are some of the red flags in regulatory radars. So I hope that has potentially driven the development of further agenda at the UN climate change in negotiations, ISO standards developments, ITU, CN standard development in the EU, and a lot more industry-based regulation in the next decade or so. This is where the AI power shines. AI's potential is immense, as everybody knows already, but they are harmed to citizens if it's not deployed properly. It erodes trust, and if there is unchecked innovation drive. We need proper regulation to mitigate these problems, balancing oversights with innovation progress. And let me give you some overview of some key concepts. We provide an overview of AI, which we already done. In terms of regulations, they are in my own research. I categorize these jurisdictions as principle-based, such as the UK's flexible ethics in regulating AI. outcome-based regulatory models such as United States, which focus on harm matrix measurement, and a hybrid model such as the EU's integrated tiers according to the latest EU AI Act at the moment. And in fact, ISO /IEC 42005 standards try to facilitate impact assessment as a way to support the technical requirements under these AI regulations. And there are a number of standards released from ITU that emphasize sustainability also. And in the EU, under the Committee of European Standardization, CEN, which I'm also a member of, we advance EU harmonized ethics amid the EU AI Act alignments. And in terms of AI climate nexus or AI climate links, as I term it here, such as the use of AI for weather forecasting, smart grids, etc., to combat the impact of climate change, involve neural net forecastings, and the use of deep minds can increase 20% of wind energy productions, which eventually curbs fossil fuels use, and at the same time in the market, there are some stakeholders association reviewing the efficiency of even boosting further the AI's power in extreme in predicting extreme weather, in the accuracy in predicting extreme weather. However, biases still endure without the technical standards. This is, I believe, this is the very part of work that we have to collaborate on, not only in legal research, but also in technical standards of development in ISO, ITU, and CEN. Okay, the next part of this talk will be a very brief global mapping of AI regulation landscape. We'll map AI regulatory landscape using model as a comparative framework, focusing on EU, China, UK, and which generate maybe some global insights. And this approach emphasizes how these models, including the ones I talk about, principle-based, outcome-based, and hybrid model, which actually promote or impede transnational harmony, particularly in climate technology where cross-border collaboration is essential. On this world map on the screen, on the screen here, you see the different countries have introduced certain regulations or guidelines to help properly regulate the use of AI in different sectors or applications. Yeah, in the UK here, we have a pro-innovation approach to AI regulations because UK really wants to speed up its status as a leader in AI innovation in every sector. Yeah, not surprising, this UK style. And then in the EU have published, actually the EU introduced the world's first and very comprehensive legislation, the EU AI Act, which looked into almost everything. And I'll introduce the EU AI Act to you in detail in a few minutes. In China, EU have recently introduced interim measures for the management of generative AI services from Beijing. It's again a principle-based guidelines which facilitates AI innovation in this great market also. What fascinates me recently is a research from the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, which proposes a 5-step process for even global South governments to devise AI regulations, highlighting hybrid models for enabling innovation amid transnational data flows. In fact, as of this month, global divergences persist, while the EU's hybrid model enforcing risk mitigation, China's principles-based guidelines aligned with the state's economic development goals, and the UK's flexibility drives growth, but the risk gaps in AI development. Yeah, and then, for example, just to lead to our discussion on EU's AI Act, such hybrid model have influenced already international treaties under development, but challenges like regulatory burdens on SMEs remains, and this mapping actually reviews arguments or precursor to reviewing the argument for soft law to bridge this divide in regulatory models. Okay, I'm not going to be very detailed in global landscape on this slide because it's self-explanatory. So I believe that Professor Stephen Minas will circulate the slides for your reading week later on. Yeah, and let me switch to the big table, which could be more interesting to you as students of faculty here. So I compared very briefly the global regulations modeled between EU, UK, and China against very briefly on this slide key features and 2025 updates. In the EU, we have hybrid models which comprises principles like transparency plus outcome-based risk mitigation. And they get many key features involving risk tiers and prohibitions on high-risk uses, such as social scoring, sustainability mandate for high-risk AI, etc. And there are further developments around the general purpose AI rules as of August this year, AI as AI continent plan in April, etc. In the UK, it's mainly principle-based regulations encouraging flexible innovation in the market. It contains a lot of voluntary groups. The UK government set up AI safety institutes, and everything that the UK government is doing at the moment is pro-innovation via sector-specific guidance. And there are further legislation planned for later this year, potentially delayed to 26 also for various reasons. In China, you also have principle-based regulatory model with emerging hybrid elements based on the state's development goals. And there are a set of ethical guidelines emphasizing social harmony, security, risk assessment for the use of generative AI. And there is also mandatory labeling for AI content being produced. So these are also a good development in terms of AI regulatory model development. And there are some other updates as of this year in China, but I guess probably some of you are more familiar with the Chinese regulation than I am. Okay, next, again, this graphic summarize where each of these jurisdictions is in the scale of global AI regulations. From the less regulated side, where India is positioned, to more regulated spectrum in which the EU and People's Republic of China are situated. So I'm not going to describe these in details. I'll let you read these scale yourself. But I would like to suggest, from a research perspective, 4 influencing factors, including economic priorities and innovation goals, ethical, societal, and human rights concerns, geopolitical and security considerations, political system and institutional capacities, as 4 key influencing factors for a country to select its select its AI regulatory models. In terms of economic priorities and innovation goals, countries with strong tech industry often prioritize regulations that foster growth with competitiveness while minimizing burdens on businesses. For instance, the United States relies on existing laws and guidelines writing comprehensive federal legislation to avoid stifling innovations, as seen in its hands-on federal approach that leaves states to experiment. Regarding ethical, societal, and human rights concerns, I see that national values around privacy, bias, and fairness heavily influence regulatory stringency, often leading to consumer protections, focused laws in democracies, emphasizing individual rights. The EU's Proactive AI Act is an example here, with its focus on transparency, safety, and human values. Expand simplify this point. It prohibits high-risk AI users different types of scoring to address ethical peril, etc. In terms of a geographical and security consideration, there is international competition alliances shaping AI laws, with nations regulating to secure technological sovereignty or aligned with partners. And China's state-aligned guidelines, for example, emphasize security and self-reliance amid US-China tensions, while the US focuses on cybersecurity and AI via G7 statements. Finally, in the political system and institutional capacity, there's countries' governance structure, democratic versus authoritarian, or federal versus unitary. All these system models affect regulatory pace and depth, with partisan dynamics emerging in AI policy makings too. So I will use these four influencing sectors to summarize the AI regulatory landscapes. So I've mentioned a few times the EU AI Act is the first comprehensive legal framework to regulate AI, aiming for safety, security, transparency, and respect for fundamental rights of the European citizens, enforced together with a supplementary act called DORA, Digital Operational Resilience Act. They rest on core principles like trustworthy human-centered AI, with built-in safeguards for accountability, fairness, and data privacy. And it applies to EU-based developers and even non-EU entities whose AI system impacts the EU to extend its influence globally. And then I try to include the regulation number here to facilitate your research. And then you see the this regulation, that is EU AI Act 2024/1689, applied throughout any supply chains to providers, importers, distributors, deployers, product manufacturers, and any other authorized representative, as long as the supply chain, any part of the supply chain operates within the EU, it is covered by EU AI Act. The EU AI Act employs a risk-based approach or risk-based classification models that categorizes AI application into 4 levels: minimum risk, which warrants no regulation at all; limited risk AI that warrants transparency requirements; high-risk AIs warranting strict requirements; while there's the highest risk one, they got unacceptable AI that's completely banned. And there is also proportional regulation based on harm to safety and human rights in the EU. And under the high risk AI system, for example, the EU thinks that perceive their system in critical sectors such as energy, education, migration are mainly categorized as high-risk AI systems. And the main obligation for high-risk AI application providers include proper risk management, high-quality data set developments, technical documentations, transparency, human oversight, cybersecurity, and robustness. So these are the 5 main obligations that every high-risk AI providers have to abide by in the EU at the moment. So I'll skip this slide because of time limits. Yeah, and then let me switch to section 3 on standards. That might be more interesting to you. So I have been in the standardization community for more than 8 years as a UK negotiator, and ISO, CEN. ISO, I know you. I'm sure you know what ISO is. CEN stand for is French word, stand for Committee for European Standardization, which is like the EU version of ISO. It's a European standards making body, recognized by all the EU member states. And the ITU in the UN system, the International Telecommunications Union, which also was mandated to produce a lot of digital technology related standards in the UN system that support various UN resolutions. And standards are actually voluntary soft law that could functionally bridge regulatory models. The role of standards actually aligned disparate framework without binding force. Instead of a hard legislation or regulations in every state, or complement legislative requirements with technical specifications. Let me give you two examples to illustrate this. In the EU AI Act, this EU legislation on digital technology references specifically harmonized standards, including those developed by ISO and CEN regarding particularly conformity assessments. And every time when the EU has certain demands for real technical standard to support implementation of any legislation, the CEN will receive request for standardization. This paper tells us what the European Commission wants from us as a standards developer in order to support the UAI's Act. Over the last year, we've been meeting at least once every 2 weeks or even overnight to speed up the development of a number of technical standards required to support the UAIS very urgently. Yeah, I think we're now completed 90% of the work, and I hope that there's no surprise in the ballot process in the EU. And another example is in the EU Energy Efficiency Directive since 2012. This directive focused on climate change and energy transition in the EU. But it references ISO 50001 energy management system. So which means that any standards, ISO, CEN, or ITU standard that are explicitly cited in any legislation, whether in EU or not, and actually have certain legal effects. So the role of standards makers like us have some important jobs to do, as different countries may choose different standards to be referenced in relevant legislation, legal text that will give these standards the legal effects indirectly. So since this is Peking University, I'll need to give you some theories. And then I found three possible legal theories supporting standards as soft law for further research analysis. The first one is delegation theory by Gusman and Mayer, which implies that soft law allows state flexibility in certain areas, enabling easy adaptation without negotiating hard laws. It justifies standards as efficient tools for evolving norms in dynamic fields like AI. Next, the International Common Law, ICL theory, also by the same two legal scholars, posits soft laws as non-binding clauses interpreted by institutions, producing quasi-legal effects like domestic tools. And this deepens norms without full consent, justifying standards' role in harmonization. For example, ITU standards influence AI network interpretation in global trade disputes, which foster progressive development, and it addresses consent barriers in pluralistic regimes. And the third one is the functional equivalence theory by Goldman, and it views standards as behavior guiding equivalence to hard law via legalization degrees, which prioritizes empirical effects over formality. And this fills voids in fragmented governance like CEN's EU AI ethics, aligning with the EU AI Act without binding all jurisdictions. and arguments critique blurring law politics, but praise efficiency in the unfeasible treaty areas. So I believe that these could be some emerging legal theories that could structure or inform if, the trend of future law research in digitalization era. And of course, as usual, standards are critical for implementation of any AI, not just the EU. I think it's everywhere. In China, here it is the SAC, the State Administration of China, SAC, developing all national or industry standards in this country. And SAC has been very much involved in the development of the national and also international AI technical standards. I know because we have been collaborating with SAC a lot at the international level. And standards translate legal obligation into practical procedures at every stage along the entire value chain. It promotes interoperability and reduce compliance burdens for business sector, because once you've got step-by-step manual in the form of standards, you just follow suit without looking for the best way in its maze. It builds trust and transparency in AI systems and empower innovation, especially small and medium-sized enterprises. Actually, the EU relies on harmonized standards to support AI governance and regulatory obligations. Okay, yeah, let me give you briefly a few examples of ISO AI standards, which have also been adopted by CN in the EU. The first one, and very important one, is TR 24027:2023, which is about bias management in AI system. It addresses bias in AI system that provides measurement techniques and methods for assessing and mitigating bias to ensure fairness of AI applications developments. It supports regulatory requirements for non-discriminations and transparency, which is quite critical for applications like facial recognition or recommendation systems such as Netflix, etc. And then I really like this AI bias iceberg I found from one of the presentations online, so I included here. Actually, whenever we are being sold an AI application, we can imagine the computational biases behind the code or algorithms driving these AI applications. However, not many people may understand that actually it is human biases and systemic biases driving biased development of algorithms or codes behind every AI applications. And the human biases, systemic biases are an exciting topic for psychology research in this era. So there's a lot of things to do among different scholars in the AI era. The next example I will give you is ISO 23894:2023. It is another important standard on AI risk management, as it offers guidance, very much needed guidance on managing risks specific to AI system for organizations developing, producing, or deploying AI. It complements the risk management system requirement in any AI acts around the world. So on the right-hand side, I made this cycle to summarize the structure and the logic behind the AI risk management standards. We'll start with the red arrow. This looks like a lucky draw wheel. This shopping center. It starts with the red arrow saying context establishment. When we create any AI application for any purpose, we must start with establishing the context properly in order to position the AI accurately in this space. Next, we need to identify risk, analyze risk, evaluate the risk, and then we need to provide solutions to treat different types, categories of risk that we've identified. The cycle goes on to monitoring and review of those risks that are where a solution are under experiment, and we need to communicate and consult stakeholders properly. There's a methodology, a consultation outlined in the standards also. It's particularly applicable to high-risk AI systems like Tesla Autopilot, ChatGPT, or DeepSeek here in China. It ensures risk to safety and rights are mitigated systemically. Another one which we are going to finish in this EU is JT02008 PREN 18229, which is an urgent standard that we are developing in a rush on AI trustworthiness framework to support EU AI Act implementation. It is a comprehensive framework to characterize trustworthiness in AI system, including provisions for record keeping, traceability, transparency, and ethical considerations. It aims to ensure AI system align with EU values and fundamental rights of EU citizens. And it's still under development. You see on the right-hand side, I included a graphics from the OECD expert group on AI risk and accountability, where you can see that in order to build up a trustworthy AI, you need to go through another cycle here, starting with plan and design, collect and process data, build and use model, verify and validate, deploy and operate and monitor this AI system. And then it involves steps ranging from embedding, documenting, communicating, consulting stakeholders, and again, monitoring and reviewing all those issues that could make or break the trustworthiness of that particular AI applications in the region. So the AI trustworthiness framework will fundamentally build up the confidence of the market towards AI regulatory system. So that's why I give it to you as one of the examples. Other than CE and ISO, we do have work at the ITU, International Telecommunications Union, regarding AI sustainability. In terms of the AI climate or sustainability nexus, there's a dichotomy of two issues. That is this A, sustainability of AI, and B, AI for sustainability. So in the ITU Y.3172, it releases it is a standard released by the ITU to focus on the sustainability of AI to ensure that there's an energy efficiency of data center and all the AI applications altogether. And we call it a sustainable AI since this year, as the UNEP and the French government has set up a sustainable AI coalition in order to measure and promote the environmental impact measurement of all AI in productions. And ITU Y.3172 is so far the only relatively more comprehensive guidelines focusing on sustainability of AI. And as I have been preaching already, standards are actually voluntary soft law, bridging gaps across different regulatory models. As soft law, international standards plays a pivotal role in bridging gaps across principle-based, outcome-based, and hybrid models by providing voluntary, non-binding guidelines that align disparate frameworks without the rigidity of hard law. For example, the CEN supports the EU's hybrid models through voluntary standards that aid compliance with AI Act and risk mitigation requirements, such as ethics and trustworthiness benchmarks, effective from this year. While ITU enables outcome-based approaches by emphasizing interoperability and sustainability matrix, like those in its Y3172 standard for AI networks, which fosters measurable harm prevention in broader ethical guidelines adaptable to innovation-driven contexts like the UK's. I can give you certain more examples to illustrate this bridging role. CN mitigates AI bias in climate prediction tools by providing voluntary guidelines for trustworthiness, ensuring hybrid compliance reduces inaccuracies in cross-border weather models. This is one of the examples that CN standard could make an influence here. And the ITU standard could potentially promote sustainable networks for smart grids, aligning outcome-focused metrics to cut emissions in renewable energy system supported by an array of data centers. And then there are further benefits, including influencing non-binding jurisdictions, such as emerging economies, adopting OECD or other UN ITU standards, and filling regulatory voids where hard law lags, like in fragmented AI governance we can see globally at the moment. So we now would like to explore three main points on the role of standards as soft laws here. The adoption of source law varies from jurisdiction to jurisdictions. The EU mandates, for example, a harmonized CN standard to support its hybrid model. It ensures compliance with risk assessments. The UK's integrates voluntarily to foster principle-based flexibility by the AI Safety Institute set up by the UK government, while China influences through plans like the August 25 AI Plus plan nationally, which aligns emerging hybrids with the state goals. So overall, these applications fill regulatory voids, promoting interoperability across model by providing non-binding yet influential guidelines that adapt to diverse jurisdictions. And in this year, 2025, CN aligned with AI Act, EU standard aligned with AI Act through, for example, high-risk assessment draft this summer, ITU Sustainable AI Working Group, and December AI Standard Summit for State Sustainability will potentially make further contributions to this area. And here in our ISO committee, which we will convene in Sydney next week, we'll discuss new auditing in impact standards to enhance transparency and eco-matrix further to support the sustainable development of AI applications. In order to boost the value of AI in climate change and sustainability governance, standards are even more vital. All these national standards can functionally enable energy efficient application to start with that actually address some of your burning questions in your mind since the beginning of this guest lecture, like reducing data center emissions or optimizing renewables in smart grids, bridging models by embedding sustainability into principle-based innovation and outcome-based matrix. So that actually echoes the delegation theory by Guzman and Mayers that justifies such flexibility, allowing adaptation in uncertain sustainability context without hard law, of course. And in fact, in July, just in July this year, the ITU AI for Good Global Summit in Geneva advanced more sustainable AI methodologies that I think influence a lot of cross-border application like event detection for climate resilience in development. And there are also emerging arguments emphasizing the nimbleness of standards for swift eco-innovation, and then challenges alike varies from country to country. So even we as standards maker, we still need to draw a clear balance between risk mitigations and innovation also, in order not to stifle innovation in any sector. Okay, to enter the final part of this guest lecture, I would like to give you two case studies illustrating all those principles or legal academic research issues, which I share over the previous slides in two real-world case studies. Case study one is about the use of AI in extreme weather predictions. It focuses on AI in extreme weather predictions where advanced machine learning models, particularly neural networks, analyze vast satellites data streams to forecast disasters like floods, heat waves, and hurricanes. And these models process multispectral imagery from satellite which extracts patterns in atmospheric variables such as temperature, humidity, and wind to generate probabilistic predictions. It often outperforms traditional numerical weather models in speed and accuracy for short-term nowcasting. There are a lot of examples about. Some of you may have heard that Stanford University's own AI system, which was introduced in May in a study by UC Santa Cruz in May this year, I think. It attributes heat waves by integrating neural networks with historical data. It improved predictions, lead times, and enabling better resource allocation for vulnerable populations. Similarly, Google DeepMind model have passed rigorous tests for hurricanes tracking, as reported just over the last few weeks in media. And the AI revolution in forecasting using convolutional neural network to process satellite inputs for path accuracy within 200 kilometers over 96 hours. I think these are very incredible achievements with these new AI applications. And in fact, the World Meteorological Organization, WMO, also highlights AI nowcasting for early warnings with systems like those from NOAA research demonstrating cyclone forecast by neural networks on satellite data. So this forms an overview of this case study. But what's more important is the implication of different regulatory models. Imagine that if you have that kind of AI in extreme weather prediction in China or in any country that you're based in, imagine that if we put this AI application in the context of all these three regulatory models I mentioned, principle-based, outcome-based, hybrid model, the ramification of all these models in this type of application will be very different. Let me analyze the principle-based approach in the UK first. The UK's principle-based approach via voluntary codes prioritize flexible guidelines to speed innovation, allowing rapid prototyping of AI without upfront scrutiny. But actually, it risks unchecked errors like overconfidence in probabilistic outputs during unprecedented events. In the US, and under the outcome-based regulation, it emphasized verifiable results, such as reduced false positives through post-deployment metrics, but often lack upfront ethical reviews, potentially overlooking biases in training data from diverse sources. So academically, if you would like to do some more legal research in this regard, you may focus on pure outcome models that may ignore systemic risk like data sovereignty in transnational satellite feeds, and which could be an interesting perspective to take in under different regulatory models implications. There are arguments for outcomes-based models that include measurability for accountability, though critics may note that ethical blind spot persist compared to the hybrids. And if this AI in extreme weather predictions is in the EU under the hybrid regulation model, we can probably imagine that The hybrids, like the EU's, offer balanced safety, but at speed cost. Principles accelerate, but risk error, if it's under UK approach, the outcomes verified, the outcomes verified, but only reactively under the US outcome approach. But in transnational challenges, cross-border data under varying regs amplify these issues. It argues for standards to bridge for equitable climate resilience as seen in WMO's hybrid recommendations for global forecasting with AI. So I hope this would give you some ideas of food for thought for different ramifications of different regulatory model within the same AI applications, depending on where it is based. The next, yes? Leave some time for questions. Yeah, and that's in the right timing because I need 5 minutes for a case study too. So in case study 2, we have AI we already have AI in smart grid optimization for renewables. The AI's role in smart grid optimizations for renewables, where predictive algorithms such as deep learning models like recurrent neural networks or RNNs in short, or transformers, dynamically balance variable solar and wind loads by forecasting generation patterns, demand fluctuations, and grid stability in real time. And these applications technically integrate IoT sensor data from turbines and solar panels with weather APIs to adjust energy distributions. It prevents blackouts, but maximizes renewable utilization and intermittency challenges posed by fluctuating weather. And if you again put this into context of the 3 regulatory models again I mentioned before, there will be it could be interesting discussions in any legal research projects too. Yeah, so if you examine the ramification of these regulatory models in AI in smart grid optimization renewables, in the EU's hybrid model, integrated risk management under the AI Act classified grid AI as hybrids according to the new legal definition. It requires pre-market assessments for transparency and environmental impacts, and actually fosters sustainable outcomes like reduced emissions through bias-free forecastings, but raising development cost by 20 to 30% for utilities, unfortunately. If we put this AI in smart grid optimization case study in the UK's principle-based approach, it encourages experimentation by voluntary codes, accelerating adoption of AI tools without upfront scrutiny, but potentially overlooking externalities like the AI's own energy intensity, which would undermine net zero goals. However, if we put again this case study in the United States and under the outcome-based regulatory model, it emphasized measurable emission reductions through post-monitoring matrix, allowing adaptability, but requiring robust audits to avoid gaps. It often lacks proactive ethics. So overall, in my personal opinion, I believe that hybrids balance safety and green outcomes at higher cost. Principles based approach speed up innovation, but externalize risk, while outcome based approach measure, but only in a reactive manner. So if we put it in a transnational context, I would say the varying models amplify challenges like data sharing for global renewables. I would like to argue for standards to harmonize these regulatory models where hybrids foster but complicate cross-border efficiency.